Once again, we're speaking to the distinguished councillor on the Hobart Council and candidate in the state election in the seat of Clerk for the Tasmanian elections, which are coming on very soon on the 23rd of March. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Why, it's a pleasure. I noticed, I saw you in an article, a report in the Mercury, and I thought it was a fair report and a very nice picture. What did you think of it?
Thank you very much. So when I announced as a candidate as an independent candidate for Clerk, it wasn't an easy decision, but looking at the ballot paper, the potential ballot paper and the parties and the policies out there, I felt that I had no choice but to put my hand up and provide people with the values that I bring with an option on the ballot, someone they can feel comfortable putting their number one next to. So thank you for that.
A pleasure. How do you think the election is going?
It's actually been quite a smooth campaign so far, I think, from both parties. There's been some of the usual sort of antics and things like that, but I think it has actually been pretty civilised and a lot of debate about the actual issues. It's certainly been so many promises being thrown around by both major parties in particular, a lot of the promises which I really think are unaffordable for our state. But I think the campaign's going quite well. Everyone's obviously ready for it to come to an end. There's been a lot of people. I heard around 50,000 people have already been through pre-poll. So I think a lot of people are ready for the campaign to end, and then the hard part will start with negotiating whatever outcomes we're looking at to see who gets what seats and where we're going to go to from here.
There was an Australia Institute poll which said that the Liberals were getting 37% of the vote, Labor only 23%, the Greens, I think 13%, the Jackie Lambie Network 8.5%, and Independents 12.8%. And if correct, Adrian Beaumont of Conversation says this would be a dreadful result for Labor 10 years after losing power. And Kevin Bonham said with the Liberal vote, the Liberals should get 14 of the 35 seats if this polling is correct. Labor 10, the Greens 4, and the Jackie Lambie Network 2 or 3, and Independents 4 or 5. Is that your feeling of what seems to be happening?
I think that sounds about right. I mean, it's a really unpredictable election because for the first time we've got the Jackie Lambie network in the mix. We've got significantly more independents. I think the Liberals are running a strong campaign in terms of their vote 1 to 7 only Liberal. But I think in Clerk electorate, where I'm in especially, there's a much higher interest in independents. Which I think is a great thing to see. I doubt that either major party will get a majority. That is a highly unlikely outcome. I think that if Labor can't win this one off the back of a 10-year Liberal government, then I think that's really quite a disturbing thing. I don't think they've taken enough advantage of the 10 years time for change type angle, which I would have expected to see more from them. But there's really only one way to find out, and on Saturday it could be anyone's guess how the ballots will fall.
And does that suggest a Liberal minority government?
Yes, I think that's definitely the most likely outcome. From my perspective, I would be happy to talk to either party. There's some things I would negotiate on, and there's many more that I would be holding very strongly to. I also note that both major parties have said that they won't be collaborating with the Greens. Labor has especially said that twice before and has done so anyway, with dire consequences for our state. When we had the last Labor-Green coalition, we had a mass exodus from Tasmania and, things were not in a good state at all. So personally, my perspective, I would like to see the Liberals returned, but I think it's healthy that we have a lot more independents in the mix and people who aren't required to toe the party line regardless of their own integrity and their own views on the matters. Because I think I know I'm not alone in saying that, unfortunately, I think Liberals have gone quite Liberal light, gone very soft on some of their policies and are pushing and complying too far with the identity politics, which, frankly, a lot of people have had enough of.
Yes, there seems to be a general view across the country that Liberals who are linos, Liberals in name only, seem to be playing a role in the Liberal Party and getting too close to what is really Labor Green policy. And I detect a feeling that people are sick of that because they think, well, if I'm voting Liberal, it should be different from Labor.
Yes, completely. And I think this is why this election really stands out. There's barely a piece of paper width between the two parties in a lot of situations. And we've seen a lot of 180s from the Liberal Party in Tasmania on issues. For example, I'm really strong on fair rights for rental property owners. And we've seen some backflips, which were really unexpected from the Liberal Party. I mean, people have an understanding of what Liberal values are, and a lot of their policies, they just simply aren't aligning with that. And it doesn't sit well for myself and others to be giving away everything and not staying true to your Liberal values because you're so desperate to win another term. That said, I do think that the state would be much better off with a Liberal government compared to the Labor government, but I think that's more so a reflection on the state of Labor.
Yes, and the state would not be impacted as much as, say, Sydney and Melbourne are in relation to the almost out-of-control immigration policy of the federal government. Would that be right?
Yes, we do get a fair share of immigration numbers because Tasmania as a whole is classified as a regional area. And I've had lots of conversations with people because we're desperate for nurses and teachers and all of those frontline roles down here. And what we have is a lot of international migrants might come down into a nursing role, for example, but they can't stay in Tasmania because their partner can't get work. But we also have people who, Tasmania's population has grown, and that's been an intentional thing by the government to grow the Tasmanian population to 650,000. But what hasn't happened is we haven't kept up with the essential infrastructure, with the schools, the roads, the hospital beds, and our other frontline services. So we are really playing catch up in that regard. We've been bringing the people in and aiming for that economic stimulus, but not providing the fundamentals that people need, including housing.
Are rents and housing prices reasonable?
They're not reasonable in Tasmanian standards. I mean, the thing is, I used to work in recruitment for the Department of Health, and we used to be able to say, come down to Tasmania. We have whilst our salaries were significantly lower, so was our house prices and our rents. We're now on par with the mainland, and in terms of affordability, I think we're actually ranked as one of the most unaffordable in terms of rents, especially given our low salaries. So that's something that needs attention, and that's something I'm really keen to see. We have all governments of all persuasions in Tasmania have dropped the ball on social and affordable housing and public housing. Because they've relied on the private rental market to be affordable. So now, because we have a deficit of public housing, the governments are needing to restrict and remove owners' fair rights to compensate for their own downfalls.
And I think we should remind viewers that Tasmania has a different electoral system. It's the Hare Clark, and that means that each seat will be electing 7 representatives now. It used to be 5, it's now 7. And the ranking question, the question of how you rank those, has been taken away. The political parties can't control how the voters rank the candidates, so you don't have to effectively follow what the party wants. Is that right?
That's completely right. So there's no above-the-line voting, and we're moving from a 25-seat parliament to a 35-seat parliament. So that's why this election is especially unpredictable, and I guess because there are two true vacancies in each of our electorates, across our 5 electorates. So voters are free to choose, and I'm encouraging people to vote for the people that they feel would represent their values rather than the party. So, the voters really need to know who they're voting for, and I think feel comfortable that the people they're putting their important number 1s, 2s and 3s against actually represent the values that we need and will stick up for what needs to be said. I mean, I'm having the Clark electorate I'm in, it's a really diverse electorate. in the inner city, really close to the CBD. We have the more affluent areas. People are thinking about climate change and donation laws and native logging, whereas only a handful of kilometres away, people are thinking about, well, they're desperate for reliable bus network, the cost of living, and health, because they haven't got the private health cover. So Tasmania is diverse, like most places, but in Clark especially, we have two very clear, distinct groups. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the voters cast their ballot.
And what's happening in the Legislative Council?
So coming up in a few months, actually, we have the seat of Hobart is definitely, they have a 6-year term from memory, and Hobart, which is the inner city Hobart seat, is up for election. The former Greens leader, Cassie O'Connor down here, is one of the candidates that has announced for that. No other major parties, Labor or Liberal, haven't announced a candidate for that seat, but I really desperately hope that there is a centre-right candidate for the Hobart electorate, because I think the Cassie O'Connor's attempt for Legislative Council is a part of, shoring up the Greens' hold in the Parliament.
Good. And in Tasmania, the upper house can't reject supply, can they?
I'm not as sure on that one, to be honest. I've been mainly focusing on getting my head around the House of Assembly. But I think there's definitely a push for people want to see independence more so in the upper house. So, but there's still a pushback and a drive from the parties to get their representatives in there too.
And when does voting close on Saturday? What time does it close, and how soon would you expect a broad result?
I'm quite sure the polls close at 6 o'clock, so the ABC will be doing their tally room. I'll be home watching on the couch in fear of any nerves for that. But a lot of people, like I said, have already pre-polled. People are really keen to get through this election. They've heard both sides. One of the key issues is around the stadium. That's actually a big ticket item in this election, because the AFL team has just been announced for Tasmania, something that's been championed for decades. So the Tasmanian Devils are set to come to the competition in 2028. But there's people who are for and against the stadium for Tasmania.
And before you go, what's your position on the University of Tasmania land? There's some dispute over that, is there not, the campus?
Yes, that's right. I strongly believe that UTAS should stay on the land it was gifted in Sandy Bay. It was gifted that land specifically for education. So I think that's a real moral issue to then sell that land and lease that land on 99-year leases. I think it makes sense from a student and staff attraction, retention and experience point of view to stay on Sandy Bay. We have CBD universities everywhere. I think the Sandy Bay location is the UTAS's unique selling point, and that it would be crazy to sell off that unique selling point.
Well, thank you very much, Louise Elliott, the independent candidate in Clark. The very best wishes for the election, and we'll be watching Tasmania on Saturday night. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.